Did you hear about the recent cloud disaster that left hundreds of thousands of people wondering if their life savings had disappeared? It's the terrifying story of how Google mistakenly deleted the entire VMware environment of the Australian pension provider UniSuper. Deleted as in gone forever. No, this is not another episode in our cloud disaster series, although it sure sounds like it could have been. You know why? UniSuper did what we tell companies to do. They had a third-party backup of their environment. Although it took a week to come back online, they recovered flawlessly. Finally, a cloud disaster with a happy ending. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. And I've been passionate about this topic for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss, no, we have no backups of Paris whatsoever. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I have with me my bad first date sympathizer, Preston and Malaiyandi. How's it going, Prasanna?
How are you doing, Curtis? I think that's what I should be asking.
It was a rough night, my friend.
Have they texted? Or are you on...
No,
have you texted?
We haven't texted. I need to text.
Yes, you should probably text.
Anybody who knows me personally might say, wait, isn't Curtis married? Hasn't Curtis been married coming up in August 35 years? Yes, I have. So what kind of first date could I possibly be going on? And it was what I'm going to call a man date with a new friend, this great guy that I met. And we're roughly the same age. We have a lot of the same interests. And we've actually, we've had like a couple meals together.
You've hung out. Exactly.
Yeah,
we've hung out for a beer or whatever.
Really, really connected, really cool guy. And then a few months ago, I said, hey, there's this comedian that is coming to the Hollywood Bowl. And I know my wife is not interested in that. And so I said, are you interested? And he's like, I'm in. And so we spent $100, $120 each on tickets. And we got there at 7:30 and the show started at 7:30. We literally sat down and the show started. It took like almost 3 hours for the headliner to appear.
That's a little long.
They had 6 warm-up comedians and then they had a rapper. Not my style of music. And the thing is, the warm-up comedians weren't that great. Especially with my friend, comedy's weird, right? And it just didn't hit.
It's hard, right? Some people connect with certain comedians, and some people don't, and some people have sort of a expression to some comedians. So
it didn't hit with him, and now we're a couple of 58-year-old dudes who realize that the headliner's not going on until after 10. And we're 2 hours from where we live. And I called an audible and I was like, he was not enjoying the guy. And I was like, let's just bail. And we bailed. And so we left like 20 minutes into the headliner act.
Well, you should text him just to see how he is. Right. That's probably important.
Yeah. So I had a bad first date with my friend. Nobody was angry at each other. I think we were both a little disappointed at the amount of time and money that we had spent. In, we probably spent $500 on the evening to get together, the two of us, and did not really get much out of it other than, at least we didn't get into a fight over our first date. Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. So I want to talk about this story that you had. So before we talk about the story, I want to talk about another sort of mini story. And that is that it's been a while since we've covered news, and there's a news event that I think is significant enough that that I just wanted to mention it. So I just wanted to talk about this one story that is it's going to be a brief story, but I think it's interesting for those of us that follow the industry, especially for those of us that have stock in pre-IPO companies, of which I believe both of us are two. So Rubrik broke the dam, right? Rubrik finally, there's been this holdup of IPOs in the tech space for quite a long time, and Rubrik, stock symbol RBRK, had a very successful IPO filing. They went out higher than anticipated. I think they were expecting something like $29. They went out at 32. They went up to 38 on opening day, and they have been hovering around 35 last time I checked. Let me just double check here. RBRK. So they went up. They went. You know how these stocks are, right? They went up, they went down. They're sort of in the middle of the road. They're still higher than they went out, which is what matters, right? At this point, they're like 33 and a half as of the recording of this. Who knows what will happen between now and when we publish the podcast. But those of us who have stock in pre-IPO backup companies are very happy to see a successful IPO in Rubrik.
Well, and it's also one of those things, like I remember when I was back in the day when I was at EMC, right, we would always look at the new competitors, right? You had Cohesity, you had Rubrik, and it was always a feeling of, okay, one of them is either going to be acquired or they're going to go IPO. It's just a matter of which one, right? And to finally see, and it's been talked about for like 6, 7, 8 years, right? And I get it. The market sort of changed, right? People got budgets got cut, so data protection companies weren't getting as much money, right? Venture capitalists decided that they want to switch over to AI, or take your pick on what they were focused on next. And so backup was sort of like the abandoned stepchild.
And of course, Rubrik's not a backup company. They're a data security company.
But I think, though, that's what's helped them, right? Is even though they waited to IPO, I think they had the time and the chance to sort of change their messaging, right? Change their focus to really hit what are the problems today.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about the whole data security thing, but it is what it is, and I'm happy for them. I'm happy for the people that work there. I hope the stock wasn't too diluted for those that had shares,
and it still stays high.
I hope it stays high, and then that signals good weather for the rest of us that need to do something. But the story that I want us to spend the time talking about is this one that, I mean, it's a brand new story. It's breaking as of us recording this. I think essentially the end of the story happened yesterday. And it's a really kind of a cool story as a follow-on to our cloud disaster series. Those stories, which I think are all really important, what those stories all told us was that when you don't back up your cloud data and something bad happens, worse things happen. Right?
Yeah.
that the cloud is not magic, and if nobody's backing it up, and that includes you, that when bad things happen, you can lose everything. There were companies that died. There were companies that lost significant amounts of data. There were companies that killed off an entire business line. This story, I'd like to say, has a happy ending. And but before we can tell the story, I think we need to talk about this company and what type of company it was. So you wanna talk about that?
Yeah. So the company is called UniSuper, I think is the way it's pronounced.
Hmm.
It's basically the equivalent of what in the States we would call a pension company. So
Right.
they help employers who are creating pensions for their employees to manage the assets of that. So they have something like 620,000 members. It's $125 billion under management. So it's not like your small mom and pops. Right. I would say it's comparable to like a Fidelity, a Vanguard, right? Like these very, very, very
Right.
large brokerages that we see in the US.
Yeah. And
Now,
by the way, it's I don't think you mentioned this was an Australian company, and
yeah,
it's what they call a superannuation fund, which, like you said, is a it's a pension fund where it's your employer is contributing to this fund on your behalf, and that's where the name UniSuper comes from.
yeah. And I think if we want to just sort of jump a little bit forward, but not quite to the issue that happened. So they, like most companies, right, they started off trying to figure out what their infrastructure looked like. Previously, they were running in two data centers in Australia. I think they were like 26 kilometers apart. Plus, they were using Microsoft Azure for some of their cloud services. And about a year ago, they decided, hey, we really want to start thinking about like cloud and migrating our applications there and the scalability and sort of the other benefits that you get of running in the cloud. And so they kind of put a bid out for tender. They looked at the various public cloud offerings and they decided to focus in on GCP. And what they started to do was actually to make it the easiest to migrate and learn in the cloud. They decided, okay, we're not going to rewrite our applications for the cloud. We're just going to sort of do a lift and shift. They were already
Right.
running VMware previously, and so they decided to use VMware running in Google Cloud for their applications.
I remember when I first heard of the concept of what at that time was VMware Cloud on AWS, and I remember
Which is no
thinking,
longer there, by the way, or
"What?
not really there anymore. Yeah, that's another piece that we should quickly talk about. Yeah. So Broadcom decided that, sorry, I should say, Broadcom decided that AWS is no longer a reseller of VMware Cloud on AWS. AWS laid off the entire or VMware Cloud on AWS team, from what I've heard, the internal folks. I saw a LinkedIn post by one of the PMs being like, hey, is anyone looking for, I'm open for work. So Broadcom still offers VMware Cloud on AWS, but it is only available through Broadcom.
Uh, okay."
But
So
the writing's on the wall.
what if you had VMware Cloud on AWS? Do you have to migrate?
So your contract, I think, is still there. Once a contract expires, then you have to go purchase it through Broadcom. Because
But
previously you could buy
but do you
VMware
have
Cloud
to
on AWS.
migrate?
No, there's no migration.
Okay, okay.
But AWS, if you look on their marketing pages and all the other things, they now talk a lot about, hey, now we will help you migrate your VMware workloads over to AWS native stuff.
Yeah, which they probably didn't do during this,
Yep.
the love fest.
A relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess going back to what I was saying earlier, I remember when I first heard this, and I was like, "This is a dumb idea," right? By the way, I'm really good at like evaluating ideas. Like this is a dumb idea. Why is anybody going to do this? If you want to be in AWS, just move to AWS. Don't. Why would you want to be a cloud on top of a cloud, right? Well, the answer is what these guys did, right? The fact that you
Yep.
could very easily migrate from one VMware environment to another. If, for example, you don't like the fact that Broadcom is taken over here and you want to migrate to another provider, you can just do a,
Yep.
vMotion and,
And
move your
you're good to go.
VM over to that
Yep.
other provider.
The other thing, at least when I was looking at this in the past, it was also your management plane stays the same, right?
Right.
Your ecosystem is the same. So you don't have to worry about, oh, am I going to be able to find this application there? How do I now retool all my processes to now work in something completely different, right?
Yeah.
It's easiest. It's the least amount of effort and
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah.
The
And so
maybe
it
risk.
turned,
We
yeah.
will get to risk part.
Yeah, we'll get to risk in a minute. Yeah, and it's the and so yeah, so I was completely wrong because there's basically VMware on all of the major cloud providers, and a lot of people are doing it for all of the reasons that you stated. And so bad things happen. So here's the good news is that well, it's going to sound like good news is that they had configured the GCP, the Google Cloud Platform. They had configured it so that their infrastructure was running in two geographies. They're like,
Yep.
this is great. I'm going to make sure that, that we're running in two geographies. But it sounds like that was mirrored. And one of the things that I often say, right, is that when you use mirroring and you do something stupid, it just makes your stupidity more effective.
Well, I think in this case, though, Curtis, it may not have been so much about the mirroring aspects of things. I think it was the fact that those two regions of data were all under
Mm-hmm.
the same account.
Right.
Right.
Well, what?
So,
Yeah, I'd still say that qualifies to fall under the mirroring thing, right?
yeah.
Given that you have a controlling platform that is controlling both,
Oh,
and
yeah.
so what happened was that someone at Google, I don't know if this, did you get in the
I don't
story
think it
that
was
this
someone.
was
I don't think it
it
was
was
someone. I think it was a process happened,
a
some
process
automated
happened
script. Yeah.
and
And
yeah, and
go
canceled
ahead.
their subscription and and then another process like, oh, subscription's canceled, delete the account. And so this basically what was running on GCP was essentially the platform upon which people would do all of their financial management for
Yeah.
their
Like, yeah.
superannuate super their super fund. And I just I can't imagine what that was like for customers.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
out
Because
there.
imagine you're retired and you depend on, hey, I need to withdraw $10,000 this month to make my monthly expenses. And all of a sudden, there's nothing there, right? It's like, where did my account go?
Yeah, and or I don't know what's worse, that there's that or there's the I'm almost retired and I
Yeah.
built up a nice pension fund, and then the site that manages my pension fund just disappears.
Yeah. Now, I think in either case, though, I think the biggest worry was, is this a cyber attack? Am I ever going to
Right,
be able to get any data?
right.
And the company, UniSuper, was really quick to say, no, this was not a cyber attack. This wasn't something that happened. We are working with it. It looks like it was a misconfiguration that led to this issue.
Yeah, and it resulted in. Well, why don't you talk about the joint announcement?
Yeah. And so in what was it? I think it was actually just yesterday. A joint statement came out from both UniSuper CEO Peter Chun and Google Cloud CEO Thomas Kurian, where they basically said they were extremely frustrated and disappointed, and that this was a isolated, one of a kind incident
Right.
that has never occurred before, and this should not have happened, and that they figured out what it was, and they are making sure it will never happen again. Which is a pretty big deal, to get the CEO of Google Cloud on a joint statement with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, whatever version of the story that we've read, there's several different, accounts of the story. In every version of that story, it's Google's fault. This was
Yeah,
not like most of the stories we had where it was a cyber attack or it was a customer mistake. This was a cloud vendor mistake. And we
yeah,
don't yet have the details of how this actually happened. But what we do know is that in a moment, they deleted both sides of the environment, right?
they lost all
And
their environment. Yeah,
mm, mm, it's just and this went on for a week, right? So there was an outage that happened a week ago on May the 2nd, and it looks like it went on for a week. Imagine being one of those people that for a week the website that manages your super fund is down. And the fear that
Yep.
your worry is that what else has happened, right? Because they're saying, like 6 days later they're still locked out of their account, right?
Yeah.
Every day you're logging in to see what your what your super
Balances.
fund looks like, and
Yeah.
boom.
That is scary. I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you, but like I know in the past I've logged into like my brokerage account, and for some reason maybe they're doing some updates, and you look and it's like $0 balance. You're like, wait, what? Because it's so hard these days. You think, oh, is it a cyber attack? Did someone actually hack my account and just fraudulently withdraw all the money? Right? There's so many things going out there. It's so difficult
Right.
to tell.
Yeah. So what I'll say is that they did what we tell people to do. They had a status site. They had a URL that you could go to, and first off, it had like a continually scrolling update of what was happening, or what still is happening as of our recording. And then it had a FAQ at the bottom, which asked really or answered really important questions like, is my money safe? Right?
Hmm.
Because that's going to be an immediate concern, is like, your systems are down. Is my money safe? And is my
And
data
how long will
safe
it
as
take for
well?
me to get it back? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And how long is this going to be? So the difference between this event and all of the events that we covered in the previous cloud disaster series is what, Prasanna?
They were smart enough to actually have a backup with a third party. And
Yes.
so they were able to restore their data, unlike the other situations.
Yeah. So they were believers in the 3-2-1 rule. We talk about it all the time. And yes, I don't have any problem with tacking things on the end of the 3-2-1 rule. But when you have a cloud service and you're backing up the data within that cloud service, whether it's a cloud provider doing this or you running some sort of like snapshot and replication system within the cloud provider, if all of your backups are sitting in the same account and in the same region, you're not adhering to the most basic definition of backup. And if something bad happens, like, I don't know, deleting both sides of, of a system due to some sort of glitch, if you're not following the 3-2-1 rule and making sure that another copy is somewhere, then you're going to have a really hard time when the bad thing happens. Luckily for these customers, and I'd say also for UniSuper, luckily for them, they had a third party backup, which, as you know, is my favorite kind, right? I'd like to
Yeah.
see, I want to make sure, I think the best way to make sure that you have data offsite, and protected in case of a disaster is to, use a third party.
Yeah. So 2 points I wanted to bring up there, Curtis.
Sure.
The first is I agree with you. Having a third party backup software or service available that you're backing up to is good. I think it actually helped them, the fact that they were using VMware, because they probably already had the software or the infrastructure or whoever it was, right? It's a lot easier than anytime you're dealing with cloud specific services that it's really hard to get the data out, right? So,
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I remember thinking as well when I thought about this event, is that the fact that they're running on VMware significantly increases the backup and recovery and disaster recovery options, because
yeah.
everybody knows how to back up VMware.
Yep.
And although it does require some changes to move from backing up regular on-prem VMware to VMware Cloud Anywhere, because you have to, as I understand it, you have to be 100% using the APIs, not anything that requires,
Scripting or
like
whatever.
root access or whatever access. You need to use the
JESX.
the
Yeah.
APIs. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Um,
that was the first one. So I think that helped them a lot. And then to the second point, I know you brought up the 3-2-1 rule, and I love the fact, like, I think it's a great sort of rule to follow. I do wonder if, when thinking about cloud or SaaS, the two should be not just on two separate pieces of media, but also two separate, almost isolated domains, right? Where you don't run into the same problem about same account, right? Because if one gets blown away, right? We've had this even with, what was it? I think it was Musi, right? Who had their backups all in the same account. It got
right.
blown away and then they lost everything. Sorry, that was Code Spaces that did that. But yeah, so I think the two needs, we should take into consideration, if you're running in the cloud, the two needs to be extended, right? It's not just on two separate pieces of media. You want to make sure you have those two separate
Failure domains, basically.
failure domains. Yeah.
And by
And
the way, I don't think that's an extension or a change of the original idea behind the 3-2-1 rule. And by the way, if you're curious about that, we were very excited to have the guy that coined the term the 3-2-1 rule back in the 90s, which is a digital photographer by the name of Peter Crook. That the idea with the two was to make sure that you, and this is whether it's physical or cloud, is to have it be different failure domains, right? So he liked the idea of, flash and tape or flash and disk. The idea is here is don't have it be the same thing. I don't think the cloud changes
yeah,
at all. You just have to
yeah.
think like everything else with
Think it
cloud.
through
You
though.
just have to
Yeah,
apply that logic to
yeah.
to the cloud.
Because I would argue that even saying two separate accounts
Mm-hmm.
may not work, especially with management layers that public cloud companies offer. Like AWS has organizations where you can have multiple accounts under it,
Right.
but they're all still under the same thing, right? You don't really have the fault domains that we were talking about. And so that's just
Yeah.
something to be aware of, right? Not necessarily saying it's wrong, but just be aware that there might be situations that you may not be protected.
Yeah. I think going back to Peter, I think he would use the term different risk factors, right?
Yeah.
Storage with different risk factors, right? And there are a number of ways to do that. And you're right. I think that just having two accounts in the same vendor, it again, good, better, best. The best thing is a different account in a different vendor, right? Because that basically means the worst possible thing could happen over here, and it's not going to affect that over there.
Unless you use the same passwords across both.
Don't do that. Okay, as long as you follow common sense,
Yeah.
right? Um, yeah, as long as you follow common sense, keep up with your patches, and use MFA, you should be good. But
Yes.
I just love that this story has a happy ending. That after a week, basically, they were able to restore the systems, restore operations, and people can trade again. And by the way, in the middle, one of the things I liked about that status was they addressed this issue of people. They're like, yeah, well, your servers are down. That's sad. I wasn't planning on logging into it anyway this week, so not a huge deal for me personally. But I do have a handful of trades that I'd like to make, and they address that issue. They're like, yeah, you can basically go to our website, which is still up, and you can submit a trade request,
Yeah.
basically online.
Yeah. So basically, yeah, which is good because they could still keep functioning.
Yeah. So the key here, and again, with the lesson is, it looks like they did everything right. They had a third party backup. They notified people right away. They kept that status update. They they made a fax. So they did all of the things that they're supposed to do. And so congratulations to them. I love the idea of the fact that this is a happy story at the end of many bad stories. And by the way, if you haven't listened to that series, it's a great series. And you might have a little trouble sleeping at night after listening to a couple of episodes.
Or maybe you'll be, hey, I need to change something about how I'm currently deploying something. Right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thanks, Prasanna, for bringing this up and for having a good convo.
Yeah, no, this was good. And hopefully, like you said, it's a happy story. I got
It's
a
a
little,
happy story.
not depressed,
Always,
but yeah, it was a little
yeah,
disheartening with those last series about
right.
common things that could have easily avoided a lot of pain.
Backup saves the day. With that, I want to say thank you to our listeners and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.